From 1997 to 2002, I was based in Singapore, responsible for media technology investment matters related to the Air Force in the Asian region, excluding Japan. Except for Japan, my business scope covers the entire Asia-Pacific region. At the same time, 1997 coincided with the Asian financial crisis, when I witnessed the impact of market turbulence. Every country and every ordinary person, no matter what their dreams are, cannot escape when great upheaval comes. Therefore, I believe this experience has had a profound impact on the way I view things in the future. I spent some time here today, and there is currently no indicator, so please arrange assistance from the rear. Could you help arrange it for me? Please help me operate it, okay? Today, I'd like to take some time to explain through a few sets of numbers, and I believe everyone will understand at a glance. 0402, 0903, 1101, and 1125 are all important time points this year. However, from different perspectives, each time point can have its own interpretation and viewpoint. Therefore, I plan to use these time points as a summary for this year. From any perspective, the changes that have taken place this year can be described as enormous and far-reaching. As Professor Lee just mentioned, the powerful nation you originally referred to was once the only dominant force in the world. The United States is a regional dominant power, but at the same time it does not wish to see similar regional powers emerge in other areas. Do you understand what I mean? Although the United States holds a dominant position in the Americas, it does not wish for new strong dominant powers to emerge in other continents or regions. Therefore, the United States has in fact become the main dominant force in the world. This concept has always been present in its long-term strategic thinking. However, between 2024 and 2025, these changes had actually been brewing for quite some time. Just like an earthquake, there are often many signs and foreshocks beforehand. By 2025, you will see 4 major driving factors of transformation. Each of these changes is highly influential and encompasses a very broad scope. Therefore, I believe that if we look back from the future, perhaps 25 years from now, we will see that this year marks an important period of profound change. In the year of the September 21st event, significant changes took place, followed by a prolonged period of impact and adjustment. It was only after that various sectors gradually returned to a relatively stable state, and today, we can have certain expectations about it. The best situation we can hope for is merely reaching a relatively stable state. There is still a long period of fluctuation before we return to true normality. In short, today we'll focus on 4 important time points, and April 2nd is surely a day everyone will remember. The tariff actions initiated by Trump triggered trade tensions worldwide. He had originally represented the guardian of global order, but on that day he stated that the United States had long been in a passive and disadvantaged position in international trade. He believed that every country was gaining unfair advantages from the United States. Therefore, he set out with a strong sense of leadership, attempting to readjust and reshape the overall international system. Arriving at the second important point in time, although many events occurred during the period, we will move our focus directly to September 3rd. On September 3rd, mainland China held a grand military parade to commemorate the 80th anniversary of victory, the 80th anniversary of Taiwan's return, and the 80th anniversary of the anti-fascist war. This parade also symbolized a demonstration and declaration of a vision for a new international order. Behind this new order, what was showcased on September 3rd was not a display of military power, but a reflection of vast technological innovation, manufacturing, industrial and commercial systems, and the nation's overall social strength. These 4 forces were clearly visible during the events on September 3rd. Afterwards, people could also observe the strategic joint actions between China and Russia, as well as the gradual entry of the global security landscape into a new phase of adjustment and restructuring. This part is Professor Lin Zhongying's area of expertise. Since I have done relatively little research in this field, I will only give a brief overview at that time. However, if we ignore the important background of September 3rd, it will be difficult to understand why November 7th became the third key event. The situation will further deteriorate. The situation is continuing to develop at an ever-increasing pace, and the trend is becoming more apparent. Even with Sinai's election, the overall changes are still accelerating. However, the drastic changes triggered after his election, especially the first clear statements in Parliament challenging the post-World War II order and rules, indeed have a very significant impact. Some people think such an action is too hasty, but I believe that a decision of such importance could not have been made on impulse. Many of you are important leaders and party officials. Do you think a decision of such importance could really have been made recklessly? In facing this matter, we must broaden the scope of our thinking and delve deeply into the underlying causes and motives. Today, I also came across some new perspectives that have been very enlightening for me. Therefore, I would like to conduct some analysis and share it with everyone. The last point may be the part that everyone is least familiar with. However, I think there is one thing that must be specially mentioned, and that is that on November 25th, it was November 24th in US time. JP Morgan Chase has submitted a series of new product applications to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. His approach is that as long as such simplified product applications can be submitted, further operations can be carried out. This measure could, to a large extent, reshape the U.S. dollar's dominance that we have often discussed recently. Therefore, I would like to take some time to share with you these 4 important points in time and themes. Please allow me to offer a brief explanation and elaboration. The idea of a stolen America, emphasized by Make America Great Again MAGA, is the central theme of Trump's 2.0 era narrative. Global division of labor. The problem he aims to address lies in the unfair aspects of globalization and the international division of labor system for the United States. His basic logic is that the American market is relatively open. Due to the influence of the global division of labor, various countries can easily enter the U.S. market and thereby gain profits from American consumers. Therefore, he used this to explain why the United States needs to reshape the global economic, trade, and tariff order. However, in his argument, he completely ignored and concealed 3 very important real issues. The first point is that the phenomenon of corporate outsourcing had already begun to take shape during my studies in the United States in the 1980s and gradually became a developmental trend. This trend has continued to the present day, and some believe it has lasted not just 30 years, but as long as 40 years. At that time, Wall Street began using each employee's corporate contribution and earnings per share, EPS, as the main criteria for measuring a company's value. Therefore, many companies began considering outsourcing lower-value business activities or processes to other partners for completion. Therefore, companies engage in outsourcing and multinational deployment with the aim of pursuing higher profits within the global supply chain, while also gaining greater market capital and valuation from Wall Street, which is closely related to their investment returns. The second major issue is that the dominance of international finance is not held by any single country, but is instead controlled by multinational corporations and capital forces. When enterprises and capital holders decide on the allocation of funds and the direction of investments, they actually influence and guide the distribution and flow of profits among nations. In the end, he completely ignored the issue of gains from trade and did not examine in depth which groups actually benefit from it and which are disadvantaged. In other words, we should consider whether trade surpluses and deficits can be assessed in a simple way to determine which countries or groups benefit and which are disadvantaged. In fact, everyone should remember that trade surpluses and deficits are essentially just the aggregation and comparison of income and expenditure, a way of recording accounts. On the surface, for example, when country A exports to country B, country A earns foreign exchange income. If country A has no other transactions with country B, it can be considered a country with a trade surplus. However, have the people of country B, in the course of such international transactions, obtained goods that they cannot produce themselves, but that have higher value or utility. Therefore, although country B appears to be a deficit nation in terms of data, the trade benefits it gains are still reasonable and normal. We should think about the issue from this perspective. At that time, former U.S. President Trump significantly increased tariff measures, which attracted global attention, and we Taiwanese still clearly remember that Taiwan ranked 4th among the affected countries. They once imposed a punitive tariff as high as 46% on us because we had gained considerable benefits from trade with them. However, everyone also knows that although TSMC enjoys considerable profits in the entire chip industry, this is mainly because its products have relatively high gross and net profit margins. However, throughout the entire industrial chain, the most profitable segment is still the core structural links located upstream. Therefore, he has overlooked these 3 extremely important and unavoidable key issues. But we still need to think about whether this matter was truly that impulsive. Is it possible that it was handled so hastily? I remember that later, for a period of time, I also discussed this topic with everyone on a TV program. If we look back at the whole process, from Stephen Durant, who was originally an unknown figure at Mar-a-Lago, beginning to gain prominence, then entering the White House as a member of the Economic Council, and later being assigned to the Federal Reserve System to implement former President Trump's policy direction, then as strategic experts, you need to analyze and understand the strategic thinking behind his actions from an overall perspective. Although this strategy has not yet achieved its expected goals so far, the main reason is that China has stated it will respond firmly and has clearly indicated that it will not compromise. Therefore, at the beginning, almost all countries were forced under pressure to accept this unreasonable idea of reshaping the global order. He once unilaterally proposed an initiative to promote the restructuring of order across 185 countries worldwide, but so far, this goal has not been fully achieved. Let's first take a look at his original goal. This initial goal is recorded in an important report written by Stephen Milan, which has an English version that can be found relatively easily. In his view, tariffs are regarded as an aggressive means of driving adjustments to the global order. This proactive approach ultimately aims to coordinate structurally with monetary policy in order to maintain the stability and strength of the US dollar. Because he considered a wide range of factors and conducted multi-level analyses, he predicted various possible scenarios and the different global responses that might arise, and evaluated the approximate likelihood of success for each course of action. In short, his 3-step approach is as follows. First, carry out a comprehensive action. After the action is completed, it may trigger a certain degree of backlash or response. These reactions may lead to short-term price fluctuations and changes in supply chains. Other countries may respond to U.S. actions by using measures such as WTO mechanisms or corresponding tariff actions. In his assessment, these situations do not constitute a significant impact, and hardly any country can truly reach the core RTFCO of the United States. However, he also noted that in the subsequent sections, there was indeed a discussion on directions for improving the industrial structure. Improving the industrial structure was always a long-term structural adjustment he hoped to achieve. Due to the implementation of tariff policies, the global trade pattern and the distribution of manufacturing will naturally undergo a certain degree of shift and change. Some manufacturing activities might return to the United States. However, people later also realized that this was indeed one of the most crucial core issues throughout the negotiation process during the Trump era. Regarding the reshoring of manufacturing, some people believe this is not an ideal approach because certain industries or products are not suitable for production within the United States. In fact, everyone is well aware of this. Suppose you want to make a shirt today. You will need fabric, buttons, thread, and various auxiliary materials. However, it is almost impossible to fully obtain these production accessories and raw materials in the United States. Therefore, it is impossible for the production activities of all industries or products to be completely brought back to take place within the United States. However, for industries involving national security or advanced high-end technologies, is it possible to appropriately reshore part of their production to the United States in order to ensure operational and supply security and stability when facing potential severe turmoil? Therefore, I believe that up to this point, it is evident that he has, to some extent, optimized the overall industrial structure. The most representative example is TSMC.
If it were not for the impact of tariffs and trade disputes, do you think that even with TSMC's plan to invest in the United States, its scale, progress, and the transfer of talent and R&D resources would still be in the same situation as they are now?
That is impossible. Therefore, he has in fact already implemented strategic considerations for safeguarding U.S. security in certain industrial sectors. However, this subsequent part of the matter may attract relatively little public attention. His core objective is, in fact, ultimately to resolve the triple dilemma faced by the US dollar, which is the fundamental issue preventing the current system from functioning sustainably. In short, after the establishment of the Bretton Woods system, countries around the world collectively decided to use the US dollar as the primary reserve currency for international trade and transactions, thereby forming a single global reserve and settlement currency system. Just like in the past, when we made military procurements, we had to first exchange into US dollars. Regardless of what goods were being purchased, payment had to be settled in dollars. The situation is the same. Taking Malaysia as an example, the local people generally have an understanding of this, and the country is classified as a non-immigration type nation. Nevertheless, foreign nationals can still reside and settle long-term in Malaysia. Within the framework of the Bretton Woods system, there existed a rather significant problem. From the very beginning, Griffin put forward this view: as global trade continues to expand, if all countries use the US dollar as their settlement currency, does that mean the market's demand for dollars will keep increasing? We all know that the pricing system at that time was fixed. For example, 1 ounce of gold was exchanged for 35 US dollars, which served as a standard to maintain a stable exchange rate. However, as the issuance of US dollars continues to increase, will it necessarily experience a relative depreciation? This issue was raised from the very beginning, and by the time the gold standard was decoupled in 1971, the system had become difficult to maintain. At that time, the exchange rate was also raised from the original $35 to $42.44. Up until now, does everyone know roughly what the current gold price is? It's about $4,600 per ounce. So, hasn't anyone thought about buying yet? Actually, it's around $4,300 to $4,304 right now, and it hasn't broken $4,600 yet. If the gold price rises to $4,600, I think many people will profit quite a bit from it. The current price is roughly a little over $4,300. Rising from $42 to over $4,300, the difference is roughly a 100-fold increase. When the gold standard was abandoned, the currency's name also gradually changed from the earlier commonly used Meijin to the unified term, US dollar. If we still used gold as the pricing and anchoring standard, then $100 million at that time might now be worth only about 1 cent in real value. This shows that the value of the US dollar is greatly overestimated in the current system. So, how should the problem raised by Trigland be solved? In fact, according to Ms. Stevens' view, her ultimate goal is to reform the entire institutional structure. Her ultimate goal is to promote the establishment of a controllable and coordinated global system, forming a new global reserve currency composed of a basket of currencies. The US dollar still accounts for the largest share and holds the greatest influence among these reserve currencies, and therefore continues to maintain its dominant position in the international financial system. If calculated by percentage in the Bretton Woods system, the US dollar is almost the most widely used currency in the world, with a coverage rate close to 100%. Therefore, the dominance of the US dollar can be said to be nearly absolute. Although people today often mention America's strong influence in military affairs, this military dominance has not yet reached the level of complete control. Although other countries still existed at that time, the US dollar's dominance on a global scale was almost absolute. Even today, people often mention the high proportion the dollar accounts for in the global settlement system. Even if it were reduced to 90, 80, or 70%, it would still fail to fully reflect its irreplaceable importance. This was the goal originally set for it. We can look back and review this point. After a full year of effort, the goal was not fully achieved, only part of it was accomplished. Therefore, I believe this was a strong and powerful move, so forceful that it shocked and caught the whole world off guard at the beginning. However, so far, we can see that there are interactions and struggles among various fields. I believe the key reason behind these struggles lies in China's consistent adherence to an independent and firm stance. If all other countries choose to yield, I believe the Chinese people bear a greater responsibility and mission. At that time, Japan, South Korea, and all the countries of the European Union expressed that they were willing to take various actions in the hope of securing more favorable conditions. However, it can be seen that all those who tried to make exchanges ended up in a disadvantageous position. This was because Trump often emphasized one phrase at the time: "You have no cards," meaning that the other side had no leverage in the negotiations. Therefore, everyone who tried to negotiate for more favorable terms ultimately failed to achieve a better outcome. Next, I will move on to the key points raised by Professor Lin. The Grand Military Parade held on September 3rd. For us, I specifically selected the latter part. I didn't choose the missile-related content, but instead picked a large drone, because I believe this drone carries significant meaning. The Grand Military Parade held on September 3rd actually symbolizes a peaceful and inclusive understanding. Because throughout June, July, and August, if observed carefully, one would notice that military activities related to the War of Resistance had already been taking place frequently, and many things were gradually unfolding. The missile systems are mainly aimed at the U.S. strategic deployments, while the main force construction of the rocket force focuses on countering the first island chain where the United States and Japan are located. As for the stealth air dominance capabilities, they demonstrate high mobility through phased achievements. The theater defense plans and other materials we have seen in the past are actually only a presentation of an overall framework envisioned by President Lai Ching-te. It seems possible to secure the area through certain means, but the J-20 has demonstrated the ability to breach such defenses, thus displaying a certain degree of initiative at the strategic level. In my opinion, what is actually more important are the latter two parts: the aerospace domain and intelligence competition. This year and next year, we will see more and more space-related deployments and developments, especially some arrangements within the ranges of about 3.6 kilometers and 360 kilometers. In other words, near the geosynchronous orbit, various related deployments and arrangements will undergo significant changes. Recently, if everyone has been paying attention, they would have noticed the first instance of refueling carried out in the air, the first refueling operation completed at high altitude. This technology solves the problem of satellites losing function and becoming space debris after running out of fuel in the past. I believe many people will analyze it next, as this development is becoming increasingly important. Finally, we need to mention unmanned operations. What is referred to as unmanned here is not limited to the drone swarms we usually imagine. In addition to being able to deploy large drone swarms or various unmanned aerial and underwater vehicles, it also possesses extremely powerful collective intelligence. They embody the concept of group coordination. At the same time, the new operating system can integrate intelligence resources from all sides to form a complete and efficient command system. The application of these technologies will replace the reliance on human labor in traditional operations with machines, reshaping our imagination of the forms of conflict and defense. I believe this holds considerable significance for Taiwan. Because at present in Taiwan, our conception of conflict still remains within a traditional model. Many young people still conduct drills based on training methods from the Second World War. However, in the future, what they will face will be highly automated unmanned vehicles and intelligent systems made of metal. Are we supposed to rely on manpower to directly confront these automated systems? Such a situation is truly unreasonable. I believe unmanned operations hold especially important significance for Taiwan, and that is why I have specifically included Taiwan among them. More importantly, it actually practiced cross-domain collaborative operations through a theater-level force organization. Since mainland China reorganized its military forces under the Theater Command System, it is evident that its overall capability for integrated joint operations has significantly improved. I believe all the officials at the Ministry of National Defense are well aware that we have long conducted joint operation training, with numerous exercises carried out across the land, sea, air, and space domains. Recently, radar lock-on incidents have also been observed between Japan's air and maritime units. I don't know why, but the Taiwanese media often refer to it as radar illumination, whereas the correct term should actually be radar lock. He wrote lock, right? Of course, I'll explain. Okay, then you explain first, and I'll add some explanations afterward. Alright, what I want to say is that from this we can see their coordination and communication are not yet fully developed. I'll leave this part to Zhang Jing for further explanation. Next, I also want everyone to understand that this is actually not limited to the September 3rd incident. I think September 3rd was a relatively important demonstration. But before the year of September 3rd, sorry, the screen seems to be a bit frozen now. Please help me switch to the next page. Yes, that's the one. On June 18th, before Operation 93, this was a diagram released by the Joint Staff Office of Japan's Ministry of Defense. From the diagram, it can be seen that China's Shandong and Liaoning respectively passed through the Miyako Strait and the Bashi Channel, conducting a long-duration joint training operation around the area of Okinotori Reef. In addition to the two aircraft carriers passing through the Miyako Strait, they also recently sailed through the Diu Strait, and in the vicinity of Tuka Tuka Island, they crossed a smaller strait channel. The passage through the strait that time was intentional, because the area is not an international waterway designated by Japan, but since other countries also often pass through there, it deliberately chose to do so. I believe that each of these three routes has considerable importance. Passing through the Miyako Strait near Miyako-jima actually demonstrates the navigational capability between the Ryukyu Islands and the Senkaku Islands. After the Goldman incident, they passed through the Diu Strait, effectively demonstrating their ability to enter and exit freely by means of navigation, and that area happens to be the sea region closest to Ningbo. Why spend more than $2,000 to produce an ebook when today's artificial intelligence, worth $27 billion, can do all the work? The actions coming from the south have particularly important significance because they pass around the entire vicinity of Okinotorishima. You can see that those positions are distributed all around Okinotorishima. Because of Okinotorishima, everyone knows that it is a reef structure, covered on top with a protective layer made of carbon fiber and surrounded by many wave-dissipating blocks. They had previously even tried to cultivate coral. As for Okinotorishima, the relevant authorities refer to it as an island, and the U.S. side has not raised any objections to this. However, they have designated a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. This range regards Japan as a large archipelagic nation composed of multiple islands. That is the black line you see on the outer edge. Within the imagined borders of this large archipelagic nation, a perfectly converging structure has formed in the south. If there were no Okinotorishima, the southern end of this large archipelagic nation would appear open, like a person standing with their legs apart. If in an open state, it is well known that when sailing from one area of the high seas to another, the navigation standards and applicable rules will differ. Therefore, he had to designate this area as closed, leaving only a region in the middle called the donut hole, which is also known as the donut central zone. However, during June, the Shandong passed through the area and made a circuit near Okinotori. In other words, this is a demonstration of recognizing the strategic value of that area. I would especially point out that in the past, the vessels Japan mostly intercepted in these waters were fishing boats from Taiwan. I can't recall all the ship names at the moment, but I remember one of them was called Longrong No. 2. They usually intercept Taiwanese fishing boats at the edge of the island's exclusive economic zone to demonstrate their effective management and control over those waters. Dear seniors, whenever Taiwan's fishermen are intercepted, inspected, or detained at sea by the Japanese side, the locations where these incidents occur are often not directly related to the main fishing grounds. At times, it is we ourselves who choose to yield in the border areas along the provisional law enforcement line. Sometimes, for example near Okinotori and distant waters, the purpose of intercepting these fishing boats is mainly to demonstrate effective administrative control, thereby affirming that the waters fall under its jurisdiction. Therefore, in fact, our fishermen bear a very important responsibility to safeguard the nation and its maritime territories. Finally, when you see the situation after the Gausher Island Miao incident occurred, do you have any new insights? During the 10th China-Russia Joint Strategic Aerial Patrol held on December 9th, this operation can be seen as a symbolic display of friendly power by two countries that were victors in World War II toward former defeated nations. Therefore, I place these few images here to let everyone know that the data I chose is from September 3rd. However, from September 3rd to today, many events have been gradually brewing and developing, whether before, on, or after September 3rd. Next, let's continue to look further. Please help me switch to the next page. Next, let's look at the Gausher visit to the Miaos, an event that everyone has recently been most familiar with and often discussed. Some of you may have noticed that I've thoughtfully placed photos of several individuals here. Gausher is regarded as an important successor to Abe, and the views he expresses are not without foundation, but have their own background and basis. Abe and Lai Ching-te maintained a close relationship. Abe and his representative figure, Gausher, also had certain interactions with Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, and in southern Taiwan, sites and statues symbolizing the commemoration of Abe were established. Do people think this situation is understandable? Why do we build his statue in Taiwan, while at the same time some people take actions such as removing or defacing President Chiang's statues? Is there a clear gap between our understanding of history and of ourselves? If we look at our birthplace, aren't we all Taiwanese? There isn't a big age difference between Lai Ching-te and me, yet he's able to accomplish such things. No wonder that even now, if people have time, they can still join the petition. Please allow me to talk about one more thing. Regarding his political and economic issues, people already see many related reports on television every day, and this matter is still developing. Mainland China has invoked a number of relevant articles and resolutions in the United Nations, covering matters ranging from number 10753 to number 79 and related content. He has clearly organized and explained each relevant provision and submitted them to the United Nations in an official letter. So far, in these developing circumstances, there may still be some details that require attention. This part is actually related to the deployment of ISR, and the layout of intelligence and surveillance is still ongoing. Next, let's look at the next page. This is about today's SiSTeCATI, whom everyone may not have seen very often. After being elected on the 21st, he immediately faced many challenges. Perhaps few people noticed that on October 30th, the yen's interest rate was raised by 0.25 percentage points to 0.5%. This change has a very significant impact on the global financial system. The Japanese yen has long remained at a zero interest rate level and has even experienced a negative interest rate policy. In the global financial markets, such a financial environment has persisted for nearly 30 years. In the financial field, there is a well-known operation called the carry trade, which involves borrowing Japanese yen and then investing in assets of other countries. For example, One can purchase US dollar-denominated bonds or investment targets in Europe, thereby using low-cost funds to engage in other investment activities. However, the so-called carry trade refers to borrowing yen to make other investments, but when the yen exchange rate experiences sharp fluctuations, the market often eventually faces correction pressure. At this point, investors may face margin calls or be forced to close their positions. When the Japanese yen interest rate rises to about 0.5%, carry trades usually come under considerable pressure for forced liquidation. Therefore, around November, there may be noticeable capital movements in global asset markets. The season is approaching. Are your audience members all prepared? Enhance this season's sales performance through TikTok's promotional reward activities. However, during the promotion process, the audience instead developed some doubts and confusion. Smart Plus's promotional strategy makes it easier to attract users and provides guidance during tracking and growth. A total of 25,240 promotional coupons have been accumulated so far. What impact will this change bring? It will affect all hedge funds and index tracking funds, and will also have an impact on Japan's domestic life insurance companies, pension funds, and the overall banking system. Therefore, after Takashi took office, her governing foundation was not particularly solid, and the situation appeared quite tense, especially in advancing policies in the financial sector. He proposed a supplementary budget of 18.3 trillion yen to continue advancing national defense construction. About 64% of the funding will be raised through the issuance of government bonds, and the interest rates on these bonds may be adjusted according to market conditions. It is said that interest rates will be raised by another quarter point on December 19th, possibly reaching 0.75%. This shows that these measures have attracted considerable attention and reaction on the international stage. Up to now, even under enormous pressure, the related decision has not been officially withdrawn. However, the domestic economic pressure he faces remains quite heavy. At the same time, coincidentally when I arrived, I saw an article discussing why Mayor Gao was able to display such strong confidence. Of course, we speculate that she might have already confirmed with the US-Japan security framework whether she could obtain support. Because the United States has also released its latest National Security Strategy, NSS. However, in that National Security Report, each region is required to take on frontline defense duties and the corresponding financial responsibilities. Therefore, he may turn back to ask whether the other party is willing to support him. We have also observed that, whether in the military affairs, or various strategic deployments, signs of tacit approval or support from the United States can seemingly be seen. However, a report today specifically mentioned that Japan might be regarded as a country with potential nuclear capability. What exactly does this mean? In other words, this country possesses complete nuclear technology and manufacturing capabilities, but has not yet actually developed them. Once it decides to commit, it can complete the related infrastructure in a short period of time. Therefore, in addition to valuing the crucial support of the U.S. Japan Security Alliance, if Takashi is truly regarded as a symbol or representative figure of Japan's military expansionist thinking, there may also be other considerations and calculations involved. I believe these are all issues worthy of our attention. Lastly, I would like to talk with everyone about the part concerning the US dollar system. Please turn to the next page, dated November 24th. JP Morgan submitted a rather extensive filing that includes multiple reports titled 424B2. This is a type of form called Form 424B2. In other words, it is a document used to describe an existing product. As long as I submit this supplementary document, I will be able to launch a new product. In short, this is the first derivative investment product designed and launched based on IBID under BlackRock, offering high return potential. Such high value-added products have gradually become more standardized and systematized, forming an official line of business. This development has also enabled Bitcoin to integrate more deeply into the mainstream financial system through institutional channels, becoming an important link within it. This allows highly volatile assets to be further structured and layered, turning them into investment products that can be packaged. When a financial advisor recommends this product to you, you may not realize that it is actually designed on the basis of highly virtualized assets such as Bitcoin. You might think that what you are buying is a specific ETF investment product. This event officially marked the beginning of full participation by major Wall Street financial institutions, initiating the financialization and commercialization of various types of virtual assets such as Bitcoin and stablecoins, signaling the start of what is expected to become a mainstream trend in the future. As for how things will ultimately develop, this will lead the US dollar to form a three-tiered system, which is the so-called dollar dominance. The parts that were not accomplished in Stephen Moran's earlier plan are now being advanced and realized by the United States through another strategy. He adopted legislation related to stablecoins. A few years ago, people might have already noticed that stablecoins were showing some structural issues at the technological transaction level. Because stablecoins maintain a one-to-one peg with the US dollar, they have given rise to new types of buyers of dollars and US Treasury bonds, further expanding the market size of related assets. Subsequently, he adopted a new model for capital operations, such as the fund scheme launched on November 25, which allowed institutions that, while not banks, could create money like banks, as well as highly leveraged funding layers, to become the third-tier structure within the overall system. Therefore, these four layers belong to off-balance sheet assets, off-balance sheet, which are neither included in the scope of the US M2 money supply nor within the global regulatory framework. As a result, the US financial system has effectively formed a three-tier structure. The first layer is the fundamental financial layer centered on the US dollar, while the second layer is also dollar-based, but features scalability and liquidity. The third layer, on the other hand, consists entirely of highly leveraged structures. In other words, when the balance sheet scale related to the US dollar shrinks from about 9 trillion to just over 6 trillion, part of the funds will quickly dissipate. And this 6 trillion is only the visible portion on the surface. Behind this scale of roughly 6 trillion, there also exists a vast stablecoin market. In addition, there is a sizable eurodollar market and a layer of US dollar funds held by the Japanese market. These two layers are centered on yen carry trades, which have further given rise to larger-scale overseas capital operations that remain active in global financial markets. Please allow me to use this diagram as a summary and explanation of the overall content. If you have the opportunity to search for these keywords, you will be able to understand their interconnections more clearly. Although the structure involved is quite complex, we only need to remember one point. The roughly 6 trillion US dollars shown on the official balance sheets may actually correspond to 10 to 20 times that amount in circulation across overseas and informal financial spheres, especially within technology-driven trading systems, and are spread throughout the world. The last page can be said to be a summary of what I discussed today. Looking back at the major changes of 2025, if we liken them to a tremendous upheaval symbolizing simultaneous shifts in four major systems, then what kinds of developments will emerge in 2026? There will likely be many evolving trends ahead, continuing to progress step by step. In such a situation, what kinds of developments might occur? I have listed four relatively plausible scenarios below. Among these, one type is a pattern of intense competition that occurs in certain specific areas, while the other presents a state of lower intensity competition. On the horizontal level, it may be an order dominated by a singular American ideal, or it may be a pluralistic order with multiple tracks operating in parallel and influencing one another. Such a situation may lead us toward four possible types of development, one of which involves long-term structural friction that manifests as a sustained and normalized state of competition and cooperation. This corresponds to the area in the upper left corner, representing the United States' attempt to establish and promote a singular convergent order. If one wishes to reconstruct a framework similar to the Yalta system, it would be located in the lower left area. I believe that in the foreseeable years ahead, this will be an order that seems to be generally accepted by default, but it lacks a clear endpoint and a definitive institutional arrangement. This may be the concept most often emphasized by the United States, an ideal order. It seeks to establish a sound institutional arrangement based on rules, but such a situation is unlikely to be realized in the near future. Then, what about China? The Chinese mainland is undoubtedly one of the key players in the multi-level order structure. In almost all organizations with multi-track or multilateral characteristics, it plays an extremely crucial role. Therefore, the contrast between mainland China and the unilateral system is quite evident. We can clearly see that the most prominent feature of the high-intensity competition between the US-led order and the order promoted by the mainland and other countries is that every field will evolve into a prolonged and continuous game. No field can come to a quick end. Every contest will continue to unfold. That is to say, even if it seems to have ended today, it may begin again tomorrow. The situation has not truly come to an end. During the low-intensity phase, people gradually begin to sense the coexistence of various different rules, the overlapping of institutions, and the constant changes in standards. This situation will gradually develop into a state in which both sides neither fully acknowledge nor explicitly deny each other. Over time, some things may become difficult to define, and in different areas, a variety of situations may emerge. Finally, allow me to offer a hopeful thought as my year-end blessing to everyone. In traditional Chinese wisdom, there is a saying that speaks of a group of dragons without a leader, symbolizing the spirit of unity, collective strength, and coordinated progress. In other words, what we often heard in the past was that after the stage of the flying dragon in the sky, things did not move toward imbalance, but instead shifted to a group of dragons without a leader, symbolizing a situation of collaboration and joint development among all parties. Various forms of order, multicentric organizations, and multilayered operational arrangements will emerge, presenting a rich and diverse pattern. At this moment, from the perspective of our ancestors' wisdom, this is instead a state of ultimate harmony and balance. Therefore, please allow me to offer this phrase as a blessing to everyone as we move toward 2026. May all dragons advance together in perfect unity and harmony. Sincere thanks to everyone for your listening and companionship.